I wouldn't take it.
Now it's done.
Welcome to ZENtalk in Atlanta, Soto Zen Center. For details on our program and other offerings around Zen meditation, please visit our website at www.ascc.org. Tonight we have a special guest, it's Seiyu Mark Adams, who has a long history of practice in Zen. He comes from the Suzuki lineage, Shunryu Suzuki, one of the more famous Japanese pioneers of Zen in America. So we're looking forward to this tonight. So welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Glad to be here.
I'd like to start out just quoting a little bit from your bio. Seiyu, and your Dharma name means Seiyu means.
It means, what does it mean?
I'll leave that with you for a minute. Seiyu Mark Adams.
I don't know really what it means.
Is a long time Zen. My teacher told me we learn what our name means. We don't know what it means. It's
Still learning.
Still learning. Mark Adams is a long time Zen practitioner in the Suzuki lineage. He has been facilitating our Monday evening reading group for some time, and will appear as our guest interview tonight. A bit of background. Mark says, although finding Buddhism in the early 70s, I've been actively studying and practicing meditation specifically in the Soto Zen Buddhist lineage of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi since 1984, and ordained as a Zen priest by my teacher Jakusho Kwong Roshi at Sonoma Mountain Zen Center in November 2008. My over 25 years of involvement as a senior student at the center included 11 years on the board. It's the most interesting practice, right?
Very interesting.
5 as the president of the board. And Zendo positions. Zendo is the meditation hall, responsibility for that, and responsibility for major building renovation. So you have some sawdust on you, as we like to say in design. So tell us a little bit about that part of your background.
I moved to California in 1976 and was introduced to the San Francisco Zen Center by my ex-wife, who she already knew she didn't know I was going there, but she knew that's where I was headed, and took me there because someone had.
She knew you were headed to.
She knew I was headed towards a steady practice. I found Suzuki Roshi through Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, but I hadn't yet found a center to practice with.
So how did your wife know you were headed towards?
Yeah, I don't know how she knew that.
Women are intuitive.
Yeah, no, actually, she took me because
she took you
what I was saying. She had been taken by a friend of hers, and she thought maybe I'd be interested because of what I was saying, what she knew of me since we had met, and it turned out that I never left. I mean, she took me there. I didn't do it myself, and I ended up going from the San Francisco Zen Center to Sonoma Mountain, which is a smaller, more intimate community.
So your wife gave you the gift of Zen. You mentioned that Zen is a great gift.
She gave me she showed me the direction to get to Sangha.
Yeah.
Up until that point, I didn't have a Sangha.
Can you tell us what a Sangha means? For those who don't know.
Well, it means the community of practitioners who share in it. But I don't think of it that way. I think that's a starting kind of the kernel of the practice are those who share the same desire to sit, to somehow make these teachings alive in their life. But then I also think that there's a larger Sangha. The larger Sangha are those who have not heard of Zen, that do not know about sitting, do not understand the teachings.
Now, the technical definition of Sangha means harmonious community, right? Sometimes the larger community is clearly not very harmonious. Can you speak about that a little bit, why we would bring people to
I'm not sure if I would know if it's harmonious or not. I think that the energy that a person brings to a group affects the group. And looking at it as disharmony might contribute to keeping the disharmony if it's actually there. It doesn't have to be there. It's more in how I show up in the group of people or the people I meet. And to me, thinking of them as Sangha means wanting an intimacy and an understanding and a connection and communication that's open to new ways of looking at our life, which the teachings give us. Gives us more clarity.
Take us back a little bit further before you connected with the San Francisco community and how you see Zen sort of infiltrating your life or coming in as an interest level for you before that happened.
I didn't know that I was interested. This is considered a spiritual practice, is what I do, and I wouldn't say that it started anywhere, but when I became conscious of it was when I was a teenager and was questioning the Lutheran tradition that I was a part of. At 15 years old, asking questions that my mom was saying she didn't know what I was talking about. Go talk to the pastor. Being conscious that something, that I was aware of something. I know it kind of gives you a little power when you're that age also. It's like people don't understand what you're talking about, but you think you got something to say.
Yeah. When a child first learns the power of why.
Yeah. And so that is where it started. But an important, and I think of it all as gifts along the way. I had a gift, and I truly do think of it as a gift of being wounded in Vietnam. And being a Marine in Vietnam, being wounded and missing death, missing having died in an environment where people around me were dying.
Did you have what is sometimes called survivor's guilt?
No, I don't, because I wasn't there, actually. I wasn't there because another gift that all these what I consider gifts make me laugh because they're not traditional gifts. Another gift that I got was from my mom and my dad. I grew up in an alcoholic family. I was very sensitive, and so was not able to really handle the tension and the anger from my dad and the environment in the family. So I learned how to shut down. I learned how to shut down almost completely. Well, I think pretty much completely. So when I went to Vietnam as a Marine, I wasn't really there. I wasn't there.
You're still shut down mode.
I was in shutdown mode. I could turn it off.
So would you say you had any PTSD as a result?
Because I shut down so completely, it never touched me. Now, I'm not to say that it never touched me. I don't recognize anything in me that's like PTSD or emotional trauma specifically to that. And because I didn't have that, when I came out, there was this opportunity to just begin to start opening. And that's been my whole work.
So you must have been in your 20s in Vietnam?
I was 19.
19. Okay. I've noted Dogen came back from China in his mid-20s. Matsuoka Roshi came to the United States in his mid-20s. I met Matsuoka Roshi in my mid-20s. It seems that point when your brain finishes wiring and you have this sense of mortality in your mid to late 20s, it's when a lot of people come to Zen practice.
It also opened me up, and it's never left me the awareness of death. It just has never left me. It's always been a part. So when I see what's written on the Han about the great matter,
the great matter,
it has a resonance to me. Can
you explain what the Han is for our audience?
The Han is a wooden block used for bringing people to the Zendo or to a work party, or it's used in a Zen community.
Struck with a mallet.
Struck with a mallet, and it's along the same lines of the bells that are used to tell us what we're doing. And one of the things that would be, if you heard that, was to congregate for
And
something.
what is it inscribed on the Han? It says,
Well, see, that's the other gift I was given. It says, well, that's another gift that was given to me, is that my brain is pretty much a sieve when it comes.
most of it's not really worth remembering in my case.
It's a real sieve. And when I was younger and I was in grade school, it was embarrassing, and it was something that I didn't feel. It's something I hid.
Yeah. It says something like life and death, or no time to waste, the great matter. You know,
Hurry.
hurry, be
Yeah.
alert.
Yeah.
The
So
Han sort of sends that signal, walk, walk, walk.
so that's been part of my journey, is to be okay with not holding on to sayings.
Mm-hmm.
The sayings seem to come up through me when
Sayings?
I'm in. Yeah, like
Sayings, yes.
yeah, sayings like sutras and quotes from the patriarchs, and
They're only fingers pointing.
yeah, and all of those. But what I notice and what I've come to trust is that they show up when I have dialogue. They show up in the relevance. They come out. They show up in the relevance of the discussion that I'm having, based on my experience, not on something that my mind has somehow learned.
Okay, well, let me read a little further. This is, I was initially drawn to Zen, this is you speaking, by the writings of Alan Watts, shortly after a tour of duty in Vietnam as a wounded Marine in 1969. Introduced to Zen with Suzuki Roshi's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, very famous book. It has been my focus and intention to actualize Buddha's teachings through my own personal Zen practice by experiencing the relevance of Dharma found in the midst of everyday life, and share that awareness with others. Beside my daily Zen meditation practice, I help facilitate and participate at the ASCC Monday night book group and host a Wednesday night meditation at my house in Marietta, where I live with my partner, and so forth. So what you're doing presently is acting on what you learned or were confronted with in earlier days after Vietnam in San Francisco. Am I reading that right?
I practiced under Kwang Roshi for 25 years. Was there a little while before I actually took Jukai, but
Jukai, can you explain?
Lay ordination for receiving the precepts and kind of saying to the community that you're Buddhist.
Yeah.
That you're
Initiation ceremony.
Receiving something you already have, but it's a expression of intent. Usually an initiation into becoming a Buddhist. And so I did that in 1994. And I studied with him for about 25 years. And in that time, I just went there. I didn't really have an idea of becoming something. All I knew is that by being there, my life changed. And there seemed to be a sustenance to these teachings that touched me quite deeply with at the beginning with Alan Watts, and wanting to understand how to bring them into my everyday life. And so I just kept going back to practice.
We know that Alan Watts was not himself a practitioner, right? He was a scholar, intellectual person.
But I think for a person who is not a Buddhist, it's a big door that he opens.
He opened up a big door,
to allow the possibility of something that resonated in me already. That was called Buddhism.
So Kwang Roshi?
Kwang Roshi.
Kwang?
Kwong-G.
And that sounds like an Asian name?
He's actually a Chinese American.
He's a Chinese American.
He was born in Santa Rosa in the 1930s.
So he's first generation here.
Yeah, and he's a disciple of Shinryu Suzuki.
And just for the sake of information, Alan Watts was the most famous disciple of Suzuki Daisetsu.
Right.
who was a
certificate.
Rinzai scholar
Right.
more than
Academic,
practitioner.
yeah.
Yeah, and introduced Zen to America in the early 50s, I believe. And America's understanding of Zen was very much oriented towards Rinzai, the study of Kohan and the more intellectual side. So when the Soto founders came along, they were teaching a little bit more down to earth, less intellectual. So Kwan Roshi was part of that
Yes.
under Shunryu Suzuki Roshi.
Right. Yeah. It's more. There's very little to grab onto. Very little to, which is what I needed. I needed to slow down a bit. I needed to ground myself. And Kwan Roshi is very structured in the Zendo. When we come to sit, we come to sit.
Yep.
You don't move.
Your comment about it being unstructured reminded me of one of Matsuoka Roshi's expressions. Zen is round and rolling, slippery and slick. Hard to get hold of. Let me read the last part of this about you. I'm a retired second grade elementary school teacher, a career I pursued at the age of 40 after several other careers. That included owning a tile contracting business, more sawdust there, and a high school residence counselor at the California School for the Deaf. Did you learn sign? Have to learn sign?
No sign.
I have been trained as a grief recovery specialist by the Grief Recovery Institute,
Correct.
which I do part-time. I'm also a part-time hospice volunteer. Besides Dharma study, I enjoy reading, studying history, hiking, working with my hands, travel, and exploring the southern part of the United States. So I'd like you to talk more about this in general, but why the southern part of the United States?
Actually, Beth asked me on the way over. She goes, "The southern part." One of the I come from California. The South is always kind of. I mean, I lived 37 years in California, having kind of a more liberal way of looking at the world than the South is. History here is. So coming here was quite a social, interesting experience.
You had
In fact,
you had expectations.
No, I had opinions. If I had expectations, it was to try to open those up a bit. And so when I drove here, I would stop along the way. And I don't know if you've ever done that, where you're driving along, you see the metal marker, history marker. I like to stop.
Sure.
And
Read 'em.
I read them along the way, and it began to make me cry. Of all the abuse and all the, all the incidences along the way that validated some of the opinions that I had of what this is. It's not what I think it is, but I needed to really get a fuller picture.
But what a tragedy! What
Yeah,
a tragedy!
a human tragedy.
Yeah,
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 what
yeah.
humans can do to humans.
Which is not exclusive to the South.
No, it's not. It's
By any
not.
means.
So, what I've been trying to do is visit the South. We back up where we live to the Kennesaw Battlefield Park, National Park, and reading about that and about the history of that, the history of Marietta, where I am, the history of Atlanta, the history of Georgia. It's just really interesting to me. So
Would you consider yourself a historian in that sense? Or
I would consider myself very interested in, and always have been.
Mhm.
In fact, before I went to Vietnam, I studied the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II. Not so much the Korean War, but very aware of the Holocaust and the rest of it. So war was a big part of my way of seeing the world. So when I joined the Marine Corps, I was not drafted. I joined, was in that mentality. And then I came home and it shifted.
So you were one of the few. I was exempted, I think, 3 times by Kennedy. I was a student, I was married, and had children. So I was ready to go. I thought I was going to go to Vietnam. But
Well, it's funny. I I enlisted right out of high school, and when I got out, I was in a year, 5 months, and 19 days. When I got out,
And how many hours and minutes?
bang, bang, bang. Yep. And when I got out, they had started, after I went in, to a lottery, and the
draft lottery.
The draft lottery.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I
The numbers.
remember sitting in a bar and saying to somebody when they said, "Well, what would your number have been if you hadn't joined?" I said, "It was really high, 800 something." No, it's only based on a year.
Right.
I had no clue.
Yeah.
Which
So you're like Muller. You wanted to go.
Yeah, I just I wanted to do something. Actually, the idea that I had of going was not the true idea. The true idea of going was to challenge myself, to find out who I was, which is not unlike this practice.
Right. I had uncles in World War II, and one was field decorated, field lieutenant, Purple Heart and all that, Korea. And he told me, he said, in Korea they just did these experiments where they dropped them behind the lines intentionally and things like that, studying war, the generals.
It's never what we think it is.
And he said, do whatever you can to stay out of it. Mm. My uncle advised me this, who was a war hero. So how did your study of history of these wars inform your perspective when you're actually in Vietnam? How did it change how you saw what was actually happening day to day?
It didn't. All my history was whitewashed. I mean, if I had actually gone in after college, or I had thought of making the decision after college, after reading All Quiet on the Western Front, or books of that nature, which had a better reality of the actual what goes on in these, I don't know, wars, I would not have probably gone in.
Can you take a few minutes to tie that back into Buddhism and Zen? Buddhism sees the world as driven by ignorance, mostly on the human scale, humans causing all the trouble, all the problems. And Buddha was said to have been asked by a tribe about their intention to wage war on a neighboring tribe. And the story goes, he didn't say, no, war is bad. He asked the question, he said, will both sides be better off after the war? If both sides are better off after the war, then it could be considered a just war. I don't know the resolution of what actually happened, but if you think about that, that calls upon those who are deciding to wage war. How could you know? If we think World War II, where we fought against the Nazis and so forth in Japan, they were our enemy at that time. Now we're great friends, which is kind of a weird anomaly if you think about it. Why were we such enemies then? We know all the historical reasons, but
I think that is the point.
And we think Vietnam was a big mistake.
I think all of that is the point. My idea or my thoughts or my impressions of any decision in my life is based in the midst of ignorance. And that my awakening, my clarity that comes a bit more with a deeper sense of what is at the moment, which is not that war is good or bad. The fact that I went, I needed to go. I needed to do what I did in the midst of what I did in order to wake up to where I was when I left.
So would you say that your experience in Vietnam was seminal and helped lead to your searching out and embrace of Buddhism and Zen?
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying about all the gifts that I've been given, that oftentimes people would say to me, well, how could you say that it was a positive thing to have done something like that? They miss the point. And the point is waking up. Because that's what this practice is about. It's about waking up. It's not about It's not about having the right opinion or the wrong opinion, or even thinking in those terms of right or wrong, but knowing how to take right action from someplace deeper within yourself. And you never know what experience out there is going to give you that awareness.
So before we turn to the audience for any questions, can you just bring us to the present and talk more about that awakening?
I don't know if I don't know if I could say that it's a awakening. I think it's been a process all along, that there's no moment the awakening occurs.
I think that's why we prefer awakening to enlightenment. For instance, enlightenment is kind of a noun, and it implies a state. Awakening implies a process.
And I think oftentimes one of the places we get stuck in trying to receive the gift of Dharma is to somehow capture it as a noun as opposed to a verb.
Right.
And to understand and to wake up is to realize it's all verb. It's all process.
Yeah.
So there is no one place. That's why I said I was kind of amazed as I was writing this out. Where did it start? I mean, or where did it what happened, where, and it doesn't. It's all of it. So is war bad? It woke me up. How bad is it?
One thing has occurred to me in Zen. People say, "Oh, I'm going to quit Zen." It's too hard. You can't quit. You can't even begin Zen. Zen is about what life is about, so it began with your life.
It does. But it begins, I think, for those who make the effort to engage it in their life, is they've woken up that it feeds them.
Yep.
That there is a sustenance there in receiving. And I think that was, I don't know, there's always been a kind of a part of me that kind of felt something.
It's sometimes referred to as like water. It's tasteless, but nourishing and absolutely vital to life. So before we turn to the audience, do you have any sort of summary statement you'd like to make, and then we'll ask for questions?
I just feel that this whole life has been very gratifying, and I'm very grateful for looking at all the different ways that Dharma has arisen in my life to wake me up to this point, to be able to share it with other people. And that's what I'm
We're grateful to have you here tonight for this discussion. So let's turn to the audience now and see if anybody has anything they'd like to ask. Just speak out a little loudly. Anyone? Don't make me call you out.
Draft number 5.
Oh, what are you?
And then Reagan stopped the draft the year I would have been called up. I was contemplating whether I was going to become a Canadian, which is kind of interesting because I'm now engaged to a Canadian and I probably will become a Canadian. The circle.
Ironically, I lived 8 miles away from Canada. I grew up outside of Buffalo, Niagara Falls.
My first trip to Japan with an associate back in 1989, we spent time with one of his friends there who was an expatriate from the Vietnam War who'd gone to Japan and become really Japanese in his culture.
You talked about your experience as a child and how that gave you the ability to black out memories. And another thing you said that I know is a hallmark of traumatic childhoods is your sort of memory as a sieve.
Memory.
He said his memory is like a sieve, like it just flows.
Sieve, yes.
And I have the same thing. And I was wondering how your experience in Vietnam affected these aspects of your life, and then how your Zen practice affected them.
I think they've been affected by it rather than them affecting this process that's in me.
Could you clarify that a little bit? They have been
meaning my Zen practice, which affects which. Does the sieve, this not being able to... I think more of what you're referring to is that as with childhood trauma, we tend to not remember our childhood very much. And it's not so much that I'm talking about. There was a period where I just don't remember certain things beyond that I relate to that trauma. I do remember quite a bit after that, selectively, I'm sure. But the sieve that I'm talking about has always been there. In my rote memory.
No, yeah, it's the same.
Right. Well, it affects my Dharma practice. It affects my my approach to Zen, because and it took me quite a while to feel comfortable with this. Is I can't tell you who said what like that. I can sometimes, and sometimes it'll happen, and that's I have another wonderful gift, is the opportunity on Monday nights to come and share my experience with people that are there, and in dialogue, stuff shows up.
Yeah, it calls it out somehow.
And it's amazing to me, because then it comes up. But if you were to ask me just a question about that, where it is, I mean, you have a wonderful wealth of knowledge in being able to do that. It's amazing to me.
I have?
You do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It took me a while
Could be a
to
burden.
feel okay. Well, I also thought that was a gift, because I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And
It's there.
when I was ordained, those outside, other Sangha members, then required or put me in a position of expecting that I do that I know this, or that I be a certain way. Well, at first it was quite shocking, because it happened literally, months after the ordination, to realize that people were looking at me differently than I was the day before.
When you
and to go through the process of realizing, no, I'm not going there. I'm not going there, but if I was in the sieve, I might have tried.
One of our senior female teachers had a wonderful saying. She said, "This is like the orange apron at Home Depot. We're here to help you find what you want and answer questions." So it kind of takes that burden off a little bit.
But I think that what I've learned and what I have accepted is that I have something to share.
Yes.
And the experience that I have has a way of expressing itself that is a little different. And because of it, I can feel comfortable of trusting that to just arise when it's meant to arise.
In introducing this program to people, inviting them to come, I point out that this talk show format is something ubiquitous now. We kind of take it for granted and sort of demean it. But if you go back and read the original recordings of the teachings of Buddha, there's always somebody interviewing Buddha. So it's an ancient format. And I suspect that because he had Subhuti or Ananda or somebody that he's talking to in front of the crowd, and they say there's hundreds of thousands of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas there to listen to him, it also for him it brought all this out. So I think the last 50 years of his life, after his 30s when he had his great insight, were self-clarifying. He was clarifying this for himself, and he was clarifying it for a more and more sophisticated audience. So I think this principle that you're bringing out, that when we put ourselves in a position of, quote, teaching, we understand Zen cannot be taught, right? But it can be learned. And we put ourselves in a position of teaching anything. You were a second grade teacher, so you have to clarify it for yourself.
And that's another gift that I was given, is to be a part of not the upper grades, but actually the lower grades, where I was a part of language acquisition.
That's so wonderful.
Understanding
8 years old.
7, 8 years old.
Right.
Understanding how we can learn how to read, but we don't comprehend unless we have the experience to go with the words, and we don't realize that. We think that we can read the words, and we can read every word, knowing what every word sounds like and what it is, And then you give them a comprehension test, and they don't have a clue what it is that it's talking about.
But the child already has full comprehension before they have language.
Right.
And I think
And so do we have
Yep.
our Buddhist, or our Dharma in there already,
inherent.
inherent.
Yeah.
That's part of the communication I'd like to give to others, is that,
That's why,
you know, the idea of thinking that you can pick up a book and it's going to give you
right,
something.
right.
You already have it, but until you experience it, you don't recognize it, you don't realize it.
Yeah. And especially, specifically, the Buddhist teachings are pointing at that. They're pointing at what we
Exactly.
already have.
Right.
So I often profile what we do in Zen as unlearning. We're unlearning everything we think we know so we can get back to something very basic. So from the audience, anything else? Anybody else? Don't be shy.
Did that answer your question, by the way?
Anything
Yes.
more on that?
I mean,
You
know,
sure? Is there something more?
I'm curious how your memory was affected by your Zen. I am curious about that.
How my memory was affected by Zen. You mean, does Zen practice help my memory in some way? If anything, Zen practice helps ground us, and that what memory is necessary, I feel better able to access, being more calm and less active. But I don't know. I had never
Well,
really thought of that. I guess
Maybe this would help. Mindfulness is a popular meme now, or phrase. Mindfulness meditation. And memory is obviously part of mindfulness, right? Remembering.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the question would arise, maybe you can speak to this, is what is important to remember?
Well, I think probably 90% is not.
In my case,
So it's
certainly not.
it's. I guess when I get together with people and what comes out is necessary, and the rest is not. Being mindful is being mindful of what it is that I need to say in that moment.
It's just not being mindlessly
not
mindful
having-
of everything or
Yeah,
of the
it's-
moment.
Yeah, I mean, well, with me when I sit, there's a attention to my mudra is what I do. I don't use the
Mudra
breath
meaning-
anymore. Mudra being the way that I hold my hands in my
Mhm.
sitting practice.
Mhm.
Goes to there, but there's also an awareness. And it's that bigger awareness
Mhm.
that is there more now than it was in the past,
So the mudra is like an anchor.
of my attention.
Mhm.
And so when I now am not distracted, or I'm more focused on my life, meditation has helped do that. I can be aware and more specific in my communications. So it has, in that way, it's really helped.
Okay, so we're running over just a little bit. And any other question? We can.
I hope you don't mind. It seems like we're sort of harping on your parents, and I was just curious. Did you continue your relationship with them after you left home, or?
I was
Okay.
estranged from
So-
them for a few years,
Uh-huh.
but the latter years, I was the one who took care of them for probably the last 15 years.
Wow.
And my sister and I were the ones that really took care of them. I mean, all of us came together at the end, but my sister and I were the ones that took my dad with a broken hip from Ohio in a car in prone position, changing diapers and everything else, down to North Carolina.
Wow.
Just loving them.
Yeah.
It changed. My dad actually, the relationship with my dad changed also. He came and worked for me when he retired in my tile business.
I'll be done.
Yeah, he came and worked with me when he was in his 60s.
The son is father to the man, something like that.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, sitting with him, work was his life, and he respected the work I did. And the conversations we had from that point, I got a chance to know who he was. And he had a chance to get to know who I was as adult.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So do you think you changed him in some way, or?
I don't think that way. It was a gift to both of us.
Yeah.
We both appreciated it.
Wow.
I think so. Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
So, anyone else? So to wrap up, would you just like to make a closing statement about where you are now, where you plan to go, and what you encourage everybody else to do?
Well, it's interesting. A couple years ago, I said to you, I didn't know what I was here to do because I was showing up here, and I still don't. And I think it's a good thing because whatever shows up, I'm more open to seeing than I am if I choose some way of seeing the world. So I've just really enjoyed being able to be a part of the Monday night group, which helps me grow.
Well, what's the difference between that and just being laissez-faire, lackadaisical, having no direction in life, all of the criticisms that we hear from our culture around that idea that you can be open to whatever happens? That's severely criticized in this particular society. Maybe all over the world by now.
I think the mindfulness is what is the key. And the mindfulness is of interconnectedness. That it's a part of being...
Tell us a little bit more about interconnectedness, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Yeah. I'm not sure I could do it in...
We'll invite you back.
three seconds.
We'll invite you back for a longer dissertation.
Yeah, I'm just really thankful for this practice and where I am right now. Everything that when I started writing that out made me realize how everything has led to this moment right here, this point in my life. And in a sense, I haven't done anything. So it's kind of like that. But I know that I made effort. And I've taken some right steps somewhere to end up here. And I really appreciate it.
That reminds me of Dogen's making effort without aiming at it.
Yeah.
From Master Dogen.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We appreciate your
Yeah.
sharing your time and your perspective
welcome.
with us. And we invite everybody to tune in again next week. We'll have another guest, and each Thursday evening. But of course, online, it's available in an archive form for anybody to follow and listen to and watch. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
You still need a bell.
That was awesome.
Still need a bell.
You want a bell?
Yeah. Or gong.
Okay, next time we'll do a bell.
That's what you said last time.